We're visiting with Judge Glen Williams. Judge Williams, you were the Bailey County judge for how many years?
24 years and 2 months, to be exact.
24 years and 2 months. How many hours?
I'm sorry, I haven't calculated that yet.
And so did you just serve all that consecutively?
No, I didn't. I served 12 years. That's 3 4-year terms. And then I quit. And I was out 4 years. And then I came back in. They appointed me back in. I served 12 more years.
I see.
And Corky Green was a judge then, followed me. And he had something that would interfere with his, it could pertain to his personality and his friends and all, and he asked if I would sit in for 2 months. And I did that. It pertained to probate matters.
So you came back and served during that period. So now, Judge, tell me, what year did you first serve as Bailey County Judge?
Well, I'm sorry, I'll have to figure that out.
Okay, that's all right. Well, why did you get into politics?
Well, because the people asked me to. I didn't really want to get into. In fact, I announced for commissioner one time and then withdrew. But they come and insisted that I go ahead. That was right after the war. And there was a need for machinery and a need for roads and things like that. And even the commissioner that was serving was a good friend of mine, and I voted for him for 10 years. But and here's the way it got started. We lived about a mile and a half or 2 miles off of a graded road, my wife and I, and had 2 little girls.
I guess that was Betty and Gwen.
That's Betty and Gwen. The commissioner was D. Warner. He was a good friend of mine, and as I said, I had voted for him every time he ran. But we didn't have a graded road within 2 miles of our house. And the rain got muddy and it was rough, and I asked D one day if he'd build a graded road up there. Not a paved road, but would he grade the road? Well, he said, you're off over there by yourself. That's a long road, a lot of road to build just to accommodate you. That didn't make me mad, but it didn't sit too well with me.
For sure.
I said, yes, but I pay taxes the same as other people, and I farm land, and I think you ought to grade me a road. And I saw him again a time or two, and I kept nagging at him a little bit, I guess, and finally he said, well, get your easement and get it signed and notarized, and I'll build it. I came up here, and Judge Tate was the judge, and
Cecil Tate.
Cecil Tate, and he and I were good friends. Turned out, I had worked with him, on the commissioner's court and on the the county. Well, yes, in the county school.
Oh, school board.
Yes. What he sent me was it wasn't an easement; it was a release of some kind. And I had to go back and get that done, and I said to Conrad, my brother, we had gone over to the Watson School. It's not in existence now.
Right. That was in South Bailey County.
Yes. We had gone over to a farm meeting, and I came home. On the way back, I said, told him about that. I didn't like the way that was handled. He said, well, I think you ought to run for commissioner. I said, well, I haven't got time for that.
And that was Conrad Williams, your brother.
It was, and it was about 1945, I believe.
I see.
Anyway, I never kept any personal records of anything I ever did, and so I don't know. I can't give you dates and certain information, but anyway, it surprised me. The next time I saw Norman Arn, he asked me, "What about this race for commissioner?" And then Johnny Angel, and there seemed to be some talk just around in the community. And Dee had said, I had talked with him, just conversation like we're having. He said, "Well, I don't want to run. I wouldn't run if they get a good man in office to support to replace me." So I went down to his house and got him woke at night. And I said, what are you going to do? Are you going to run, or are you going to want me to run, or what? Well, he said, I don't know. He said, he never did say whether he's going to run or not. I never did. When we had candidate speakings, he was never there, but everywhere I'd go, he had handed out cards. And the people weren't liking him too well. But anyway, Bill Eubanks ran too. And I made this statement. At Baileyburg, they had a candidate speaking down there before this all got underway. And I just went down there just to, if I was going to get into politics, just to get my foot in right now. And they asked me just make a speech. So I made a little speech, and I told them, I understand that if I run, and I am going to run, that there's two other men going to run. And I don't want them considered as opponents. They're not running. I'm not running against them. They have the same right to run as I do, and they're friends of mine. And I don't want to disrupt that friendship. What I'm running for is for county commissioner, and I'm running because I've been requested to run. And I think I understand enough about the community to make a successful commissioner. In fact, I had never mentioned it to anyone, and very seldom ever mentioned it to anyone today. I just now thought of it. In fact, I had sold war bonds.
Really?
Really? Oh, yeah, all over the community. I rented some land from E.R. Hart. You know who he was.
Yes.
He came out the house one day, and the war was getting underway, and wanted to know if I'd get somebody engaged to sell war bonds. I thought, well...
During World War II.
That's right. I was kind of bashful and didn't know much about publicity and things like that. All I had done was farm and hoe cotton and grub mesquite and herd cattle and sheep and so on. But I thought about that, and I'll just do that myself.
Sell the war bonds.
Sell the war bonds, yes.
Now, explain to people what exactly a war bond is.
Well, they call it a war bond. It's a government bond. Then they wrote them in the amount of $25 or $37.50, $50, and $75 and $100. They're just regular war bonds. They're just regular government bonds. Now they still produce them, I guess, but the banks don't handle them anymore. They don't make enough money out of them. But they were good, guaranteed return, and they paid pretty good interest.
Do you remember what the interest might have been?
It was about, well, it was a rotational. I mean, it would begin as, now they had 10-year maturity date.
10 years on all of them, no matter what.
That's right, it had a maturity date. Well, it would start with a certain amount of interest and then just gradually go up. That was an encouragement to get a person to hold them instead of sell them.
Sure.
You could cash them anytime you wanted to.
Now, where did you go to cash a war bond?
Well, like I say, the bank, Muleshoe State Bank, but you could cash them in nearly any institution of that kind, savings and loan or something. But
And of course, the Muleshoe State at that time was the only local bank. And now, would this be in the early 40s, or would you have started selling them out there in your community in the late 30s?
Well, it would have been the early 40s. It was about the time the war started.
Okay.
I remember asking Mr. Hart, well, why do they want to sell war bonds? And he said, well, I think one thing, it looks like we're going to have kind of a flush of money, and he said to keep down something. I forget now. Keep down. I'm sorry, I can't think now the words he used.
That's okay. That's okay. But now, why was E.R. Hart a part of trying to get you to sell war bonds? What was he representing?
Well, he was one of the city leaders then.
I see.
He was operating the City Hart business here, and I was farming a half section of his land.
I see.
So he
came to you
came,
for help.
He came to me. That's one of two times that he ever was out there. I got along with him fine.
Uh-huh.
But I didn't know. I was a little quietly bashful then. I wasn't afraid to approach people, but I didn't know how.
Uh-huh. But you learned, didn't you?
Well, I didn't do too bad.
Well, now, Judge, during the war time in Bailey County, what was it like?
Well, what was it? Just a community.
I mean, you know, people today are dissenters. They are against things. Were people against World War II? Were people united? What were the people's feelings, and how did they feel when their sons, especially sons, went off to war?
They were very much they knew we had to go to war.
They knew.
If you remember, and I'm sure you do, it was on Pearl Harbor Day. That's when I heard President Roosevelt. I was in Phillips. There was a man named Phillips, and you know, owned a little store there at Stegall, and I was in there. And he had a radio, and I listened to the president make a speech. And he pointed out the fact that we had been attacked by the naval and
The Japanese.
yes, and they did a terrible damage. Of course, you weren't as old as I am, and consequently weren't as old as I was then. But anyway, they did a lot of damage. They sank some big ships and airplanes and so on. And for that, he said that we declare war. I'm calling on the Congress to declare war. Well, the British government, you know, had already been bombarded to pieces by Adolf Hitler. And so that put us in the war, then the total war. And I was glad of that because I didn't think America was going to get whipped or we were going to lose our civilization. But it was bad news. Hitler was running the things the way he wanted them. He and Mussolini from Italy and all those. And you probably remember they had driven all of the soldiers of all our side off the continent of Europe. There wasn't any men left on the continent. And I asked Mr. Hart, why did they want to sell these bonds? Well, he said, we're liable to get into a period of inflation, And another thing is to hold down that inflation and just to encourage people to save their money. I always was afraid to call on it. Never had the know-how to call on people. And Pete Phipps, I viewed him as a good man, but one that's very stingy. And you couldn't, I just in my own mind, I just thought, well, you couldn't sell him anything. And he was in Philip's store where we listened to that speech by the president.
Uh-huh. And we should say, in those days, of course, there was no television.
Oh, no, there wasn't no television. I didn't even have a radio. I bought a radio so I could keep up with the war.
Really?
That's right.
Where did you buy that radio? Do you remember?
No, I don't remember. It seemed like I ordered it from a catalog, but
Probably so. Yeah, I imagine you did.
I had it put in. I'd bought a new pickup, and I had it put in it.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, I put it in there, so and I got one to have at home. I wanted to be able to keep up with what was going on in the world. And
you were interested in the world news.
Oh, yeah. So I turned to Pete Phipps, and I said, Pete, I'm going to begin to start selling war bonds now today, and said, I want to sell all I can buy. I said, you wouldn't want to buy one, would you? Well, he said, I've been buying them for years.
Oh, really?
I said, oh, you are? Well, I said, would you sell me one? He said, are you going to be selling them? He said, I sure will. I'll sell you. I'll buy them from you. And from there, I went to everybody in that whole area selling war bonds, more times than one, and I never came across a person that didn't buy them.
So people really supported the cause.
They did. And it wasn't very long after that till I was running for commissioner, going around the same people.
Well, and so you were known well.
Oh, yeah, but was that?
Now, this community area was what? But we mentioned Baileyboro, but what, Stegall?
Stegall and Goodland and Maple.
Uh-huh.
And
the three-way school area, sort of.
It was. In fact, it wasn't long after that three-way was created from Maple, Watson, and Goodland schools.
So those three schools banded together to make one school, and that's why it was called three-way.
That's right.
Uh-huh. Now, did you go to school in Bailey County?
Well, I went to school what little I went at West Camp.
At West Camp, uh-huh.
I didn't go to school much. I went we lived at West Camp 3 years. We landed here from Oklahoma on the first day of February in 1929.
So you got here for the Depression.
Oh, yeah. I went through, we saw the Depression, we lived through the Depression, and I know what it is. But I know every time I'd go around, when I started campaigning, I'd hand them a card, and they'd say, well, I didn't think you knew how to do anything but sell war bonds. But every person I called on bought war bonds. Now, they may have cashed them pretty quick, but one man out there came in one day and told me he had lost his. He bought them. D.P. Brinker, he's a man he was a prosperous man, farmer, but he knew how to make money and knew how to keep it. And he had bought a bunch of them, and he had lost them. And he asked me, could he get them back? And I said, sure, they'll cash it. They'll cash them. All you got to do is get the information to them. And I said, I'll do that for you. Well, they said, do you think if I don't cash them, can anybody else do it? And I said, nobody but you and Ms. Brinker. That's all. Well, they said, let's just leave them. Just let the government. He said, just leave them. And he had thousands of dollars of them, too.
And so during those years that after you and came with your family to Bailey County, well, did the Dust Bowl years come around after that, or did they happen before you came to Bailey County?
What do you mean by
The Dust Bowl.
what?
Where were you living when the Dust Bowl years were happening? Were you farming during the Dust Bowl?
Dust Bowl. I couldn't get what you were saying.
Dust Bowl, uh-huh.
Oh yeah, we were farming. I wasn't farming on my own, but that's all we did until I got in politics. But anyway, we had farmed 3 years out at West Camp.
Uh-huh.
And times, our crop made good. We got hailed out, and then in 29, 30, and 31. Now in 29, we made a good crop, and it got hailed out. Number 30, we made a pretty good crop. 31, we made a booster crop, and the depression had hit, and we lost our farm. So Dad told me one day, said, I'm going to have to take you out of school. Said, I hate to do that, but I got to have your work. And so we moved to Stegall then and put in there.
Uh-huh.
And my mother she died in March of 19. We moved down there, and she stayed in the bed nearly all the time, and my little brother did most of the cooking and so on. But
Was that Conrad, your little brother, or not?
no, he's the older
He's
brother.
older.
Scott.
Scott.
Yeah.
Is he still living?
No, he got murdered back in 1970, just about the time of the you know, a lot of people gauge things by Kennedy.
Yes.
It was about the time Kennedy got killed. Well, Scott was a young boy, and I asked Dad one day if something about Scott, and he said, well, he didn't look like he was going to live when he was born, but he was a courageous little booger and smart and knew how to handle things, and went to school, and he was managing Higginbotham Lumberyard.
In Muleshoe?
No, he had worked here at Muleshoe, but he and George Mayo got crossways, and so he left there and went to. There's 2 towns down there, and I never can think of the name of them. But he worked there in one of them for several years, and I was talking to Petersburg. I was talking to the banker there, and I don't know what I was talking about, but he said, that little brother of yours, Scott, can save money the best of anybody I ever saw. Said he come in here the other day and said, asked me, said, I've got a little money on hand. Said, what would you do with it? Buy bonds, or would you put it in insurance? He said, I wouldn't do either one. I'd get out and buy me a little business and operate it myself. Said, in fact, if you do that, I'll go halfers with you. He said, I like to do that. A man that I have confidence in, and that is honest and knows how to run one, and get located. Said, I'll find some money and we'll go halvers. Said, I'd be glad to do you that way. And I told Scott, I said, there's your opportunity, Scott. But never could find any business that suited him, and his wife didn't want one at all. He loved that lumber. And some burglars got in the lumberyard one evening about sundown, and he went down there to get them out to see what the deal was. And this fellow had been in the prison once before, but he and Scott had got along, and Scott trusted him in the business and all. If he was buying anything. And for some reason or other, he didn't get along, and he shot Scott twice in the belly and once in the head, and Scott fell on his face, and he beat him in the head, and that was the hardest thing that's ever happened to me.
Is that right?
But it is. I almost cry every time I mention it, because Scott loved me. He loved me more than he loved himself. I know I bought that insurance agency, and I got a little in tight for money. And I just made mention. I said, I need a little bit more money. Well, he said, I believe he said $15 or maybe $1,500, something like that. In the savings and loan at Lubbock, and said, I'll go get it and you can have it. I said, I never mentioned borrowing it or anything like that. He went and got it and gave it to me, and I just fresh had the check to repay him with when he got killed.
Really?
And so he was, now my older brother wouldn't do that.
But now, your faith in God brought you through those rough times like that when Scott was murdered, right?
Yeah.
You have been an elder for many years in the Primitive Baptist Church, haven't you?
For a good long while, yes. And he was a member. But yeah, I was that's one thing that I did. I tried to do too many things. And during those years, the county government was busy.
Yes.
That's when we voted bonds and built 76 miles of that farm pavement.
Farm to Market roads.
That's right. That's the first pavement that was ever built in Bailey County on the roads.
Now, also, weren't you the judge when Killer 84 was widened also?
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
Of course, if people weren't living here back in those years of the 50s and 40s, they don't realize how dangerous that highway to Clovis was. And many people were injured or killed on that because of wrecks. And so they widened that road during your time as judge.
That's right, and Woodrow Couch was one of the commissioners, commissioner out there, and he was opposed to widening that road.
Oh, really?
That's what got him beat in the next election. But the state paid the cost of getting the right-of-way. The state paid half of that, and we paid half, and they were ready. They put up about $200,000 or $300,000 in with a county clerk, and they were ready, but Woodrow wouldn't do it. It's in his precinct, wouldn't do it, and so that's when Cecil Stevens ran and beat him. But then one day, I can't ever think of that man's name. He's a successful farmer out west of town. He came in one day and said, Glen, I want that road doubled, and said that wreck was out there. The 3 people killed in that wreck, and I was the first there and said, I want that road widened. I said, well, I do too, and I did all my best to get it widened. And I said, you go talk to your commissioner. He did, and then that I think that cost Woodrow the next election. But we had widened part of it down here. And to show you about how things like that go, they had put up half of the cost of widening. We had to have it all audited, to where the state knew what we was doing. We was buying this. We had to buy the right of way and clear the right of way. Of any consequence, when I became judge, there was one head-on collision right out here, just beyond what now is just beyond the town. It ran head-on into a fella, killed all 5 people in that car, and Norman Bays was the county attorney, and I tried the case there. And there's where I learned a little bit about law, and I learned to like law, and our law library was in my office, and when I didn't have anything else to do, I read law. But there's 5 men in there, and they were killed, just dead. And that was one of the first law trials that I held. Carl Lovelady, you remember him, of course.
Sure. Uh-huh.
He was good to me, even though he had, like me, had his faults and all that. But he kind of helped me along, and he had said something about the charge, and the defendant was one of the finest lawyers in the state of Texas, and he said something about getting our charge together. I didn't know what a charge was. I went to ask Carl right quick, what is a charge? Well, he said when you get through and you get all your evidence in, then the judge will draw a charge, telling them, charging them with this has got to be the rule. You got to go by these rules and come up with an answer. So I thought that'll never happen to me again, and I went up and got 2 or 3 cases and read them charges, and I called Judge Bills. I fell in love with that old brother.
Now, he lived in Littlefield, didn't
Yes.
he? Uh-huh.
That's when this district was 5 counties instead of
2.
well, yes. But I don't know, I just fell in love with him. I called him and I didn't know how to draw a charge for any case, but especially a murder case.
Uh-huh.
And
Now, how did that come in county court, Judge, being a murder?
well, that's a good question.
Is it because it was with a vehicle and because of the times? That's the only thing I can think of. I think today it would be in district court.
I'm mixed up on the trial date. You're right. It was tried in district court, but there was another court similar to that I don't remember what it was. But I called Judge Bills and asked him if he
draw up the charge.
Yeah, I asked him if he had. He said no. I said I don't. In all my years of practice, that I've never had. That was some kind of a murder, but it wasn't. It was a minor case. And I asked him if he had had a charge with one of those that I could copy. Well, he said, I never have, in all my years, I've never had a case of that kind. So I just said, well, to myself, I'll just draw one myself. And the highway patrolman, when the trial was over,
Yes.
and I don't mean to be boasting here at all, but I just sat down and rested, waiting for the jury to come to their verdict. And the highway patrolman came and said, I want to tell you this, said that trial was conducted the best of any I've ever had to sit in. And
What a compliment.
I thought so. And wasn't too long after that till the district attorney from Levelland called me and said, I understand you drew a charge for the murder case up there. Is that right? I said, well, that's right. And he said, well, could I have a copy of it? And the law appealed to me. I like to.
The charge in a case would just be your charge to the jury, telling them what they needed to do, what this person had been charged with, right?
Well, yes, and the conditions, certain conditions that you got to meet along, and
Right. You know, speaking of this wreck out, or the wrecks, many wrecks out on 84, of course, one that people may not realize that happened was when Benny Douglas, who was a high school student, was killed there on 84. That was near the Progress community, I believe. Do you remember that at all?
I remember it. I didn't have any personal connection with it, but I remember it. And there was another, one of the merchants here in Muleshoe lost his boy out, but he ran into a tree, I think.
Uh-huh. Of course, Benny Douglas, the high school football stadium was named for him. He was fixing to start his senior year, and his parents were here in lived here in Muleshoe for the rest of their lives.
Oh yeah, I know. The fact that I'm not certain the same family, but the first sheriff of Bailey County
was his grandfather or great grandfather. Yes.
Yeah, Douglas.
Yes, you're certainly right.
Mm-hmm.
The old Douglas home was located across the street west from Mary DeShazo and is still standing there. H.A. Douglas Sr. was his name.
I knew him.
Did you?
Yeah, well, we just came here, and we came here in 1929. The first election was in 1930, and he didn't run then, but in 32. That's when the senators were, not the Senate, but the term of the office was only 2 years instead of 4. But he ran again then and was defeated. That's when Jim Cook became, he was elected sheriff then.
I see. You were speaking of an attorney here, Carl Lovelady. I remember some really good things about Carl Lovelady. When I was very young, he was very instrumental in getting the Babe Ruth League baseball park built here in Muleshoe, which was on the south end of Main. It still stands today. I think it may be a softball park, if I remember now, but he worked real hard with that. And his wife, Jean Lovelady, of course, for years was the tax assessor collector in Bailey County.
Yeah, they were lovable people. Carl had been a county judge and also a county state senator.
Oh, really? Now, that I didn't know.
That's right.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
but not from Bailey County.
No, he came to Bailey County. I don't know what had happened to the man, but you go down to Austin then, around the state, the capital, where the senator meets and all, and they spoke well.
Judge Glen Williams, we've really enjoyed visiting with you and reminiscing with you. How young are you now?
Well, until the 18th of August this year, until then I will be 97.
97. You are now 97.
That's right.
97. And your wife is right there with you, isn't she?
Yeah, she's 4 years younger.
And how many years have you been married to Gladys?
Well, I was 24 when we married, and she was 20. That's 4 years difference. So she's been married about 94 years, I guess. 93, I guess.
Well, you're 97, and you married at 24, so.
Should be 93.
So she's 93.
Yeah.
Well, in advance, we'll say happy 98th birthday, okay?
Well, thank you for that, and I apologize for my inability to speak.
Oh, no, you did wonderful, and thank you for your valuable time.
Well,
Wish you and Gladys.
Well, the same thing to you, and I appreciate it, and I want you to feel free to call on me for anything, any information you want. I've worked at a lot of things, and all that, and I'll be glad to to talk with you about the mental cases and the whole thing. I served 20 years on the Board of Trustees over at that mental hospital over at Plainview.
And Judge Williams was on that first board when it started so many years ago, and he has been very much a part of the progress of not only Muleshoe but also Bailey County and our entire area. Judge Glen Williams.